I recently grabbed coffee with a software engineer who just spent 48 hours embedded inside a mid-level federal agency.
Oh, wow.
He looked less like a tech disruptor and more like a man who had seen a ghost. He described walking past rows of cubicles where the air felt heavy, almost static.
I can picture that.
And he sees this senior administrator, someone making six figures, meticulously hand-stamping a stack of papers that had already been digitally verified 3 times.
Hand-stamping? Seriously?
Hand-stamping. And when he asked why, the administrator didn't get defensive. He just smiled and said, "This is how we ensure the process is respected."
The process is respected.
Right. My friend realized then that the process wasn't a means to an end. The process was the product. He told me it felt like watching a massive ancient engine idling in a closed garage, just slowly suffocating everything inside with its own exhaust.
That's an incredible image.
And to him, this wasn't just some funny story about government red tape. It was evidence of a malicious entropy generator, a system that has evolved to convert human potential into pure friction.
So it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly. He said, we aren't being held back by a lack of tech. We're being held back by a code base that's mostly bugs and 0 features. But then his tone shifted.
Okay.
He pulled out his laptop and showed me this dashboard for a project he called a system-level performance optimization. It wasn't about reforming the agency. It was about refactoring it. He talked about debugging the state as if the government were a legacy operating system buckling under its own weight.
Debugging the state. I like that.
Watching him scroll through lines of code designed to automate decades of human latency, I realized the Government Efficiency Commission isn't just a political committee. It's a forced hard reboot. We're at a point where either we debug the state or the state debugs our future into oblivion. The great filter isn't waiting for us in space.
It's sitting in a filing cabinet.
It's sitting in a filing cabinet in D.C. right now. That story really stuck with me. The idea that bureaucracy itself, this institutional friction and policy inertia, has become the central, civilization level barrier to human progress right now.
It's a huge claim.
It is. And that's what this deep dive is all about, refactoring the state and, accelerating our future.
And we are approaching this from a distinct, almost radical angle. We're treating governance not primarily as an ideological battlefield, but as a solvable engineering challenge.
Right.
Our mission here is to analyze how new technological architectures, specifically autonomous AI and decentralized energy, propose to eliminate this institutional sclerosis and maximize what advocates term civilizational throughput.
So we're really navigating between 2 big ideas.
We are. On one hand, the philosophical drivers, which all kind of coalesce around effective accelerationism or ECOLAS. And on the other, the necessary physical architecture, sovereign decentralized systems that you would need to actually build it.
Okay, so let's unpack the core diagnosis first, starting with that idea of the state as an entropy generator.
Right. For proponents of this view, the modern state, especially in, developed Western economies in 2025, often operates as a vast self-referential system.
Meaning its main job is to sustain itself.
Exactly. Its primary output, they argue, is not public goods delivered efficiently, but rather the creation and maintenance of systemic friction.
And this friction is formalized under the concept of institutional sclerosis?
Correct. The core premise is, it's observational. Over the past 50 years, the sheer volume of regulatory code rules, compliance layers, environmental reviews, zoning restrictions, it's expanded at an almost incomprehensible rate.
Just exploding.
Exploding. Yet, at the same time, physical progress, our ability to move atoms quickly and cheaply, whether that's in infrastructure, energy, or aerospace, has slowed or plateaued dramatically.
And the argument isn't that they're just correlated.
No, the argument is that the explosive growth of procedural complexity is the direct cause of the stagnation in the physical world.
So the system is structured to make building almost anything, a new subway line, a nuclear power plant, or even affordable housing orders of magnitude slower and more expensive than it was 50 years ago. I remember in the original script, we used a computational term, ON, complexity. Can you explain that in practical terms for someone who hasn't touched computer science?
Yeah, it's a critical concept to get your head around. In computational complexity theory, ON, that's O factorial, describes a growth rate that is, frankly, worse than exponential.
So it's catastrophic.
It is. If N is the number of bureaucratic steps or regulatory layers for a project, the total complexity and costs don't just double or triple, they explode with every new layer you add. A tiny increase in complexity causes a disastrous explosion of friction.
And when you apply that to infrastructure,
They argue that the process itself consumes more resources, more time, more capital, more human effort than the intended outcome. It ensures that essential projects just die of old age before they can ever be completed.
and the staggering result is that taxpayer capital gets redirected. Instead of funding advancements, it just becomes the metabolic sustainer for the bureaucratic organism itself.
Precisely. Human energy, engineering potential, public funds, they're all converted into this low-value output. Heat, noise, and, PDFs. Compliance documentation. The state transitions from a tool for progress into a vast maintenance mechanism for its own operational complexity.
The structural mechanism that facilitates this stagnation is what they call the vetoes of the many.
This refers to how policy has evolved to grant a huge number of minor stakeholders, or even just individuals, the procedural leverage to halt major projects indefinitely.
And this is rooted deeply in the precautionary principle.
Deeply.
We hear about the precautionary principle a lot, but how is it specifically, weaponized to generate this structural paralysis?
Well, the precautionary principle basically dictates that if a risk is uncertain but potentially catastrophic, you have to prioritize caution, even at the expense of potential benefit.
So it shifts the regulatory default from go to stop.
Exactly. It becomes a weapon through instruments designed for maximum friction. You see it in multi-decade, sometimes 50-year drug trial requirements, or extremely risk-averse permitting for any new technology.
And of course, the endless environmental impact statements.
Most notably, in the U.S., the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is often cited as the ultimate example. It allows any party to demand extensive reviews that can add years, even a decade, to a project's timeline.
So even if the project, let's say a carbon-free nuclear plant, has a clear net positive impact, the procedural requirement to prove zero risk against every conceivable negative outcome just traps it.
It traps all physical innovation, anything involving atoms, in this procedural quicksand. You end up prioritizing the certainty of stasis over the probabilistic benefits of acceleration.
The outcome is paralysis.
Absolutely. Advocates point out that infrastructure spending in the U.S. and Europe has become uniquely inefficient. Why does it take 20 years and $4 billion to upgrade a single highway interchange?
Or 17 years for 3 subway stops in New York.
Right. The answer, they insist, is the cumulative effect of these veto points and the resulting procedural drag. It makes essential construction prohibitively expensive and time-consuming.
And this is where we return to the human element. The realization that human latency is often the bottleneck. That story about Arthur, the senior zoning officer, it really drives this home.
I think Arthur represents the physical manifestation of that sclerosis. He was a dedicated professional who had spent a career navigating what had become, frankly, an unnavigable system, a labyrinth of overlapping regulations and permit applications.
So he wasn't malicious.
Not at all. But his human capacity, the time it takes for any human to meticulously check 1,000 conflicting rules, made him an unavoidable generator of latency.
And I recall the story that when his office shifted to a new automated system, the code over Clerks, model Arthur, watched a specialized, decentralized AI agent process what amounted to a decade's worth of backlogged housing permits in less than a minute.
A decade's worth. In seconds.
And the AI wasn't gatekeeping with pre-approval. It was just verifying safety parameters against a real-time audit-trailed ledger and clearing the way.
That speed differential, that illustrates the entire accelerationist prescription. The shift isn't about cruelty, it's about necessity. If institutional friction is the great filter trapping us in stasis, then human latency, no matter how well-intentioned, is the mechanism of that friction.
So you're swapping the comfort of a familiar, slow human process for the velocity required for civilizational progress.
You have to.
So governance is reframed not as a political negotiation, but as a debugging problem focused on computational throughput.
Exactly. And the first principle is code over clerks. The idea is a radical simplification of process. Proponents argue that a large majority, they often estimate around 80% of repetitive administrative functions, are essentially just state machines.
Predictable process.
Completely predictable. They just wait for human input, which often involves subjective discretion. And that introduces latency, inconsistency, and the risk of corruption.
So the solution is the radical replacement of this human layer with optimized systems.
The proposal is to deploy local large language models, LLMs, and specialized domain-specific AI agents as the new core civil service. Because these systems operate at digital clock speeds, are audit-trailed, and function based on objective rule sets, they eliminate human latency and subjective risk.
They process those decade-old zoning permits in seconds, not years.
Exactly.
But this is where I start getting nervous. We're talking about automating governance. The argument is efficiency. But what about the genuine democratic need for human oversight, local discretion, or just the capacity to say, wait, this algorithm is making an ethical mistake?
That is the essential critical question. And accelerationists argue that the current system already uses subjective, inconsistent human discretion, which is far less auditable than an AI agent's logic.
Okay, so what's their proposed solution?
It lies in the second principle, the shift from permission to accountability.
Moving away from pre-approval gatekeeping to ex-post accountability. How does that translate into governance?
It means you sunset the pre-approval model entirely. Instead of spending 10 years proving a technology is 100% safe before it launches, which is impossible, the state shifts to the development paradigm you see in high-velocity sectors like modern aerospace or software.
Okay.
You set clear, ambitious, outcome-based goals, for instance, achieve multiplanetary capacity by 2040, or reduce housing costs by 50% in 5 years.
And then you establish clear safety boundaries, the guardrails.
Yes, clear, measurable safety boundaries.
Right.
And within those boundaries, teams are allowed, even mandated, to iterate rapidly. Regulation shifts from trying to prevent every potential failure beforehand to enforcing ex-post accountability for measurable, verifiable harms.
So if a new drug causes verifiable harm,
The company pays the cost, faces severe penalties, and the drug is pulled quickly. This is the application of a fail-fast, iterate mentality to public policy. You trust that rapid learning and measurable accountability leads to faster, safer progress than perpetual pre-approval stasis.
and all of this is unified under the concept of the hard power stack. The idea being that national competitiveness is now measured less by traditional metrics and more by pure technical capability.
Precisely. They argue that in the 21st century, national power is ruthlessly optimized in 3 technical metrics: joules, flops, and newtons.
Joules, flops, and newtons.
Joules for energy density and abundance, flops for computational power. So AI, simulation, speed of decision-making, and newtons for the ability to move matter quickly and efficiently, which translates to logistical dominance and infrastructure scalability.
And the state's core functions must be rebuilt entirely around maximizing these 3 outputs.
Completely.
That focus on technical optimization and massive scale takes us directly into the philosophical engine of this movement, effective accelerationism. Okay. What exactly is this beyond the buzzy term on social media?
Well, effective accelerationism is a 21st century techno-optimist movement. It's distinct from its earlier, more esoteric roots in the mid-2010s. Its visibility has really soared because it's been openly embraced by powerful figures in Silicon Valley major VCs, tech founders, who see policy inertia as the primary threat to their investments and, frankly, their vision for the future.
The name itself combines effective altruism, that rigorous evidence-based pursuit of global good, with traditional accelerationism, which was more about intensifying change to provoke a leap forward.
And the synthesis is powerful. The core belief is that unrestricted, rapid technological progress, particularly the development and deployment of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is the only viable path to solving fundamental, universal human problems: resource scarcity, poverty, disease, war.
So they position themselves in direct opposition to any views that promote caution or slowdowns.
Directly. They label such opponents as decels or stagnationists.
And the vision goes beyond earthbound issues. It has an almost cosmic dimension, right? The goal isn't just terrestrial comfort, but ensuring human survival and propagating consciousness throughout the universe.
That is the profound ambition. Climbing the Kardashev gradient. The Kardashev scale measures civilizational advancement based on energy harvesting capacity. Type 1 is planetary control, Type 2 is stellar, Type 3 is galactic.
Right.
Proponents like Guillaume Verdon articulate the aim as maximizing energy usage to ensure humanity moves up this gradient. This connects back to these thermodynamic theories of life, like those from Jeremy England, suggesting that life itself is a system designed to accelerate the increase of entropy by consuming and spreading energy.
So accelerating progress isn't just human ambition, it's fulfilling a universal thermodynamic mandate.
That's the framing. And if you accept that premise, then anything blocking energy maximization like bureaucracy is acting against a cosmic imperative.
Which creates a profound sense of urgency for them.
It does. And that urgency is amplified by the conviction that AGI is fundamental to achieving this scale. Therefore, they advocate for the rapid, unrestricted development of multiple competing AGIs in a decentralized free market.
Arguing that competition is actually safer than a centralized approach.
Right. They argue that this approach, rather than centralized governmental oversight or an AI pause, is the best way to ensure safety, as competition minimizes single points of failure or centralized malicious control.
This philosophy fuels the concept they call the techno-capital machine.
The machine is defined as the combination of technology, the accelerating factor, and free markets, the capital allocation mechanism. They see this engine as the primary successful driver of perpetual material creation and wealth generation over the last 2 centuries.
And the manifestos define its singular objective in very concrete terms.
They do.
Which is to make 2 fundamental inputs, intelligence and energy, too cheap to meter, or TCTM.
Exactly, TCTM. If both intelligence, so computation, planning, optimization, and energy, the fuel for all physical work, approach zero marginal cost, the resulting economic shifts are revolutionary.
What does that resulting vision of abundance actually look like? If TCTM is achieved, what changes about our physical world?
If energy and intelligence are near free, the argument is that the cost basis for nearly all physical goods just collapses. Manufacturing, logistics, resource extraction, all massive energy sinks would become so efficient that everything from building materials to advanced medical equipment could become as cheap as pencils or paper clips are today.
That's a huge claim.
It is. This collapse in scarcity drives quality of life into the stratosphere. Furthermore, because resource constraints are lifted, proponents argue we are dramatically underpopulated. They estimate that the planet, properly managed with TCTM energy and intelligence, could comfortably support 50 billion people or more.
50 billion.
Moving beyond Malthusian constraints entirely.
That is massive scale. And it demands policies that embrace risk and speed rather than caution. We need to look at how that philosophical acceleration translates into a governing strategy.
Right. The policy models have to shift from defensive caution, the precautionary principle, to strategic boldness, which is embodied by the proactionary principle.
Max Moore's concept. Can you detail the core operational difference between the two?
Well, the precautionary principle says, stop until you prove there's zero risk. The proactionary principle states, we must assess risks according to available science, account for the massive cost of opportunities foregone, and favor measures proportional to the probability and magnitude of the impact.
And crucially, it places the burden of proof on those who want to restrict something.
Exactly. The burden of proof is squarely on them. If you want to stop a new energy technology, you must convincingly prove that the potential damage outweighs the immense, potentially civilization-ending cost of not moving forward.
That's a profound shift in regulatory philosophy. It moves us from a reactive, fear-based state to one that views the freedom to innovate as a fundamental strategic asset.
It is about valuing velocity. They argue that decades of opportunity costs, the cures we didn't find, the clean energy we didn't build, the infrastructure we didn't deploy, far outweigh the risks of moving fast and intelligently correcting errors ex post.
And this philosophical shift is paired with a policy framework called supply-side progressivism.
This complements each perfectly because it addresses the physical world. Conventional progressivism often focuses on wealth redistribution or subsidizing access to goods that are artificially scarce because of regulation.
Right.
Supply-side progressivism flips this. It emphasizes increasing the supply of essential goods and services through deregulation, making them abundant and inherently affordable. The focus is increasing the size of the economic pie by removing regulatory bottlenecks rather than just fighting over the slices.
So if housing is too expensive, you don't just give out rent vouchers, you ease zoning laws, especially single-family zoning rules, to allow for high-density, affordable apartment construction.
Exactly. Or if healthcare access is restricted, you don't just subsidize premiums, you dramatically increase the supply of trained professionals by removing artificial limits on doctor residency training positions or licensing requirements.
It directly targets what they call cost-disease socialism, where essential goods get expensive because their supply is artificially restricted, and then the costs are just subsidized by the state.
Locking in the inefficiency.
And this is absolutely critical when applied to energy. They advocate for energy abundance over conservation.
This is a core tenet. They cite historical evidence that every major leap in human progress, from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution, was driven by finding a new, more dense, more abundant energy source. They insist we must prioritize the massive deregulated scale-up of new energy technologies, particularly nuclear and fusion, by dismantling regulatory roadblocks.
This leads to a strong critique of what they call cost disease environmentalism.
This is a sharp observation that many well-intentioned environmental regulations have ironically become the single greatest obstacle to deploying clean energy.
Yeah.
Well, they point out that even utility-scale solar arrays, massive onshore wind farms, and certainly new nuclear power plants are consistently stymied by endless environmental impact reviews, particularly those mandated by NEPA in the US or similar European directives.
Can you provide a specific example of this friction in action?
Look at solar projects in the American West. A developer might identify a perfect site in the desert, but the permitting process is derailed for years because of reviews focused on the habitat of a specific lizard or the impact on a remote viewshed.
And the delay just kills the project.
Right. It ensures that the project becomes financially non-viable or is completed too late to meaningfully impact climate goals. The regulatory framework, built to protect nature, ends up preventing the very technologies needed to decarbonize the power grid efficiently.
It's incredible that the U.S. has closed far more nuclear plants this century than it has opened.
And it's not due to lack of technology, but due to that regulatory quicksand and shifting political appetites fueled by decades-long approval timelines.
This takes me back to the narrative I found about Elena, the nuclear physicist, which beautifully illustrates this philosophical pivot from caution to strategic boldness.
Right, that narrative about Elena highlights the necessary shift in institutional attitude. Her father spent a career watching promising reactor designs die slow deaths because of perpetual committee hearings and shifting regulatory goalposts, the literal definition of cost disease.
But now Elena is working under a startup state framework.
That's the key. The government treats her fusion pilot not as a liability requiring pre-approval, but as a high-performance sprint. The state created a hard power stack sandbox, shifting the burden of proof entirely.
So she's allowed to build and iterate rapidly.
With regulatory oversight provided by real-time monitoring and ex-post accountability. It fundamentally changes the dynamic. If the sensors indicate a safety deviation, the system halts automatically. Otherwise, the policy dictates acceleration. And build it now.
And the acceptance is that while physical risk must be respected, the risk of opportunities foregone of staying stuck in a 20th century energy paradigm is far greater.
Exactly.
It's a compelling argument that we've let fear dictate our ceiling. The critique that the old regulatory state is a parasite on progress is radical. But when you look at the stagnation in critical sectors, it's hard to dismiss the core observation. The pivot from don't do it to do it right, but do it now seems to be the necessary mindset to achieve energy abundance.
And this brings us back to the argument that national competitiveness is now measured in that technical trinity: Joules, flops, and newtons. This perspective demands ruthless optimization of the state's core functions.
What specifically are the three core optimization mandates for the acceleration of state?
First, energy abundance. This means deregulation and massive investment in small modular reactors, or SMRs, advanced fusion concepts, and deep geothermal, with a clear focus on scale, not just pilot projects.
Okay.
Second, computational sovereignty. Building national, sovereign AI clusters, powered locally and focused on high-speed optimization of governance and industry. And third, logistical dominance. Scaling infrastructure that enables rapid, cheap movement of matter, with Starship-class rocketry often cited as the necessary technology for true global and multiplanetary logistics.
And this ambition immediately generates friction with the decel conflict, the collision between accelerationists and the coalition of the stagnant. We need to report impartially on the nature of this conflict.
The adversaries are diverse. On one side are the entrenched incumbent corporations who are part of that coalition of the stagnant. They actively use regulatory capture lobbying for safety rules that increase compliance costs,
creating effective market moats that choke out smaller, more agile startups.
They use complexity as a competitive weapon to maintain their market dominance.
And on the other side are those who fear the ideological and existential consequences of unchecked acceleration.
Yes. The primary philosophical fear is posthumanism, the concern that this trajectory leads not to human flourishing, but to humanity being rendered obsolete or replaced by an AGI.
A digital theocracy.
Right. They fear the loss of human control, agency, and democratic structures if governance is fully ceded to algorithmically optimized, profit-driven machines.
So the calls for an AI pause or overly risk-averse AI safety measures are viewed by accelerationists as a Trojan horse. They see it as a mandate for civilizational pause.
And that it prioritizes abstract risk modeling over material human progress and survival. That's the crux of the conflict. The accelerationist policy response is to adopt that fail fast, iterate mentality setting, relentless metrics for infrastructure built per dollar or days required to obtain a permit, and aggressively deprecating any policy or institution that doesn't demonstrably increase throughput.
It is a fundamental disagreement on the nature of risk, progress, and the optimal path for the future of the species.
Absolutely.
Moving from the philosophical clash to the physical world, the most acute point of friction and the most immediate target for refactoring is energy infrastructure. The accelerationist argument is that the existing centralized energy grid is fundamentally misaligned with an AI-driven, decentralized world.
The misalignment is a product of history. I mean, the grid was brilliantly designed in the 20th century for a static, centralized industrial economy.
But today?
Today, it's facing twin compounding crises that make it unfit for purpose. The crisis of aging power production and the crisis of aging transmission lines.
Let's start with production. How deep is the problem of aging assets?
It's structural. In the U.S. alone, nearly 43% of the total electricity generating capacity in 2023 comes from plants over 40 years old.
Wow.
These plants, largely coal and legacy gas, are decreasing in efficiency, demanding skyrocketing maintenance budgets, and are fundamentally inflexible. They cannot respond quickly to the dynamic, high-frequency load fluctuations required by smart cities and real-time AI inference engines.
They are static assets in a kinetic environment.
Perfectly put. And the transmission system that connects them is even more sclerotic. Over 70% of U.S. transmission lines are over 25 years old. This creates a critical structural bottleneck.
So even if we had the power, we couldn't get it where it needs to go.
Right. Even if we miraculously funded and permitted a new massive clean energy project today, the transmission lines required to bring that power from the generation source to the consumption hubs, the cities face permitting delays of 8 to 15 years.
Because of those same vetoes of the many.
The same vetoes, coupled with the complexity of securing eminent domain across multiple jurisdictions.
You mentioned Europe as well, struggling with grid congestion.
Yes. Despite spending tens of billions annually on upgrades, modernization efforts in Europe are consistently insufficient to meet demand. Grid congestion has become a major economic drain. For instance, grid bottlenecks cost Spain over 2 billion euros in a single recent year because power generated in one region could not be physically delivered to a consumption center in another.
And beyond inefficiency and cost, the centralized architecture is a massive single point of failure.
It's a high-value target for both physical and cyber attacks. A centralized grid relies on long-range transmission, making it vulnerable to everything from sophisticated nation-state cyber incursions to simple geopolitical exposure and catastrophic climate disasters.
You can't run an AI-dependent civilization on something that fragile.
You can. And the final piece of the crisis is the surging demand from the technological future we are trying to accelerate into, AI workloads.
The demand curve is approaching vertical.
It really is. Hyperscale data centers and the required edge compute infrastructure are demanding power capacity previously associated only with entire major cities. They are pushing these aging centralized systems past their operating limits. The architecture of the future decentralized AI, real-time IoT, autonomous systems simply cannot function efficiently, reliably, or safely on the legacy grid.
The system just can't handle the load or the required low latency. So the solution is not just incremental upgrades, but a technological pivot toward high-density modular power co-located with the computational demand. But first, why do accelerationists reject grid-scale renewables as the final destination technology?
They're viewed as a valuable bridging technology, to be clear, to move away from fossil fuels. But they're rejected as the foundation for a Type I civilization, primarily due to density and capacity factors.
Right, the capacity factor, the ratio of actual output to maximum possible output.
Exactly. For solar, it's around 25%, and for wind, maybe 35%. Contrast that with nuclear, which consistently runs above 85%.
That intermittency requires massive, prohibitively expensive battery storage that simply doesn't exist at scale yet.
It doesn't. And beyond intermittency, there are the immense physical costs. Grid-scale renewables require massive land use strain. You see whole green hillsides covered in solar arrays. Furthermore, we face an emerging e-waste crisis. Turbine blades are non-recyclable composite materials already clogging landfills.
And solar panels have toxic components.
Right, creating major disposal dilemmas as they age. Renewables are seen as insufficient, inefficient, and spatially constrained for the goal of TCTM energy.
This is why the entire focus shifts to small modular reactors, SMRs. They are seen as the foundation for the next chapter.
SMRs represent a transformative technological and logistical evolution of nuclear power. They're carbon-free, factory-built, which drastically reduces construction time and cost overruns, and are designed to be deployable at the district level, typically providing 50 to 300 megawatts of power.
And critically, they are designed for co-location near consumption,
which eliminates the reliance on failing ancient transmission lines.
And we are already seeing this pivot among the world's highest density energy consumers, the tech giants.
Absolutely. Amazon Web Services, Google, other major players are actively securing nuclear power purchase agreements or backing SMR startups because they recognize that only localized, dense, reliable baseload power can future-proof their AI and data center campuses.
So SMRs provide that predictable high-capacity baseload for critical infrastructure.
Right. They can anchor hospital microgrids, power computational centers, and enable combined heat and power, or CHP systems, by efficiently reusing the waste heat for district heating and industrial processes.
And beyond fission SMRs, there's a quiet but significant investment in frontier tech, like low-energy nuclear reactions, LENR, or what was once controversially known as cold fusion.
LENR is not dismissed today as it was 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, advances in material science, computational modeling, and specialized research programs have revived the investigation. Government programs like DARPA and RPE are funding research.
Looking into these anomalous heat generation phenomena.
Yes, often involving nickel or palladium lattices and hydrogen isotopes, which may yield a path to clean, abundant, and extremely compact energy.
What makes LENR such a game changer if it pans out?
It offers the potential for high-density, portable power without the traditional challenges of fusion, extreme temperature and plasma confinement or fission, with its long-lived radioactive waste. If scaled, a compact LENR device could power a building, a naval vessel, or an isolated industrial complex with clean energy derived from basic elements.
These are the truly high-density solutions that proponents believe are necessary to achieve too cheap-to-meter energy without vast land use.
Exactly.
The energy shift must be matched by a digital shift. The same need for decentralization applies to AI and IoT, moving intelligence to the edge.
That's the concept of local intelligence and holographic governance. We must move computation, inference, and actuation away from centralized cloud platforms. By locating AI right where the sensors and physical systems are, in the SMR control rooms, on the traffic lights, in the hospitals, you solve latency issues, ensure data sovereignty, and drastically increase security.
Because intelligence is distributed, and this creates holographic governance. What does that term signify?
It's a distributed, resilient model. Instead of relying on a monolithic, centralized brain in the capital city, intelligence emerges locally, from the ground up. Each node, each city, district, or municipal department can iterate on its own unique challenges,
incorporating local language, cultural nuance, community priorities,
all into its AI optimization engines.
So if one node figures out a significantly more efficient way to optimize, say, waste management based on local AI inference, that optimized model can be shared horizontally across the federated network.
Yes, that's the geometric, Fibonacci-like expansion of intelligence. Innovation compounds laterally and locally, significantly reducing dependency on a handful of proprietary, centralized cloud platforms owned by a few global giants. This decentralization inherently increases both resilience and civilizational throughput.
But the path to scaling nuclear and decentralized intelligence is blocked. As we established, it's not a technical block, it's a political and institutional one. We need a way to unlock the nuclear freeze.
Nuclear deployment is stuck in a classic game theory trap: the multiplayer coordination failure. Every rational actor, investors, technology developers, regulators, utility companies, has an incentive to wait for someone else to move first.
Why? Because going first means absorbing immense strategic risk, years of regulatory exposure, and huge sunk costs, often with a chance of political cancellation halfway through.
It's the strategic stag hunt. Everyone wants the high payoff, outcome-scaled, reliable nuclear deployment, but the risk-dominant strategy is defection, or waiting, because you don't believe your partners are truly committed.
And no amount of regulation, tweaking, or marginal subsidies will break this inertia.
It won't.
So if the market mechanism has failed, the state must intervene decisively. And this is where we have to clarify what they mean when they demand nuclear be reframed as strategic sovereign infrastructure.
They argue that nuclear energy is fundamentally misclassified as a market commodity, valued by its levelized cost of energy, or LCOE.
Which is just the total cost to build and operate a plant divided by the energy it produces over its lifetime.
Right. But that valuation ignores the catastrophic cost of not having it. The cost of climate catastrophe, grid failure, or civilizational stasis.
It must be valued like a missile defense system or the Federal Reserve, an essential asset for national permanence and continuity.
Exactly. Therefore, to break the coordination failure, the state must issue a credible sovereign signal. And for that signal to work, it must possess 3 attributes: visibility, irreversibility, and costliness.
Okay, let's break those down. Visibility means it has to be public and clear.
It has to collapse ambiguity. The state must declare unequivocally, we are building 50 SMRs in the next 15 years with transparent funding and public prioritization.
Irreversibility means embedding consequences that make political retreat prohibitively expensive.
Right. Allocating land and beginning site work immediately, making the financial and political cost of stopping the project astronomical.
And costliness proves seriousness. It must involve significant political and financial capital.
It has to be an unmistakable commitment. Historically, large-scale executive-led initiatives, the Apollo program, Eisenhower's interstate highway system, the Manhattan Project, they worked because they issued precisely this kind of sovereign signal. They forced all secondary actors to immediately realign their expectations around the new, accelerated reality.
The ultimate danger, they conclude, is not sovereign overreach, but sovereign absence. Continuing under the market frame means structural stasis and decades more of pilot projects that never scale.
And this structural absence is what forces innovators to bypass the system entirely, leading to true decentralized acceleration.
That's the essence of the cloud community story. They didn't wait for the sovereign signal, they created their own.
That fascinating account highlights the strategic bypass mechanism. This was a collective in a special economic zone that was fed up with the local utility monopolies using outdated regulations, regulatory capture to block innovation. They chose to deploy a sovereign tech stack entirely separate from the legacy infrastructure.
They deployed decentralized, small modular reactors that were small enough to fit inside shipping containers.
They didn't even attempt to connect to the aging sclerotic municipal wires. Instead, the local SMRs powered a high-density computational hub and a vertical farm directly. They didn't ask for permission because the technology and the localized architecture made the traditional regulatory gatekeepers irrelevant.
They effectively created a localized Type I energy pocket in a Type 0 world.
And this illustrates the fundamental idea. If the centralized state remains an entropy source, a source of friction, the most productive accelerationist members of society will simply build their own localized, optimized governance and infrastructure stacks. They're building the logistical dominance that the traditional state failed to provide.
We also have real-world initiatives demonstrating this need for autonomy, often driven by crisis. Tell us about the Calistoga initiative.
Calistoga, California is a powerful proving ground. Recurring grid outages, driven by massive utility-led power shutoffs due to wildfire risk, critically threatened local hospitals and water systems. The city realized that waiting for PG&E's decade-long transmission upgrades was not an option for survival.
So their response was rapid decentralization.
They partnered with private companies to create a local, hydrogen-powered microgrid integrated with advanced AI and IoT systems. They used hydrogen-powered linear generators and battery storage, which allowed the city to operate autonomously and resiliently when disconnected from the main grid.
And what was the role of AI in that specific microgrid?
The AI and IoT layers continuously monitored local load, predicted high-risk weather events hours in advance, and optimized the dispatch of power from the various decentralized sources, hydrogen, solar, battery, to maintain continuity.
And this demonstrated that resilience and autonomy are inseparable outcomes of intelligent local power management.
Crucially, yes. And while they faced zoning exceptions and environmental reviews, the local crisis created the necessary political will to overcome those complex hurdles quickly, leveraging existing legislation designed for pilots in high-risk zones.
Now, compare that crisis-driven flexibility in Calistoga with the structural rigidity of high-friction hubs like New York and Madrid.
These legacy global metropolises are the ultimate testbeds for the accelerationist model, and they demonstrate the sheer difficulty of refactoring the state. Madrid is governed by deep centralization, involving national utilities and multiple, often conflicting layers of Spanish and complex EU law. Any attempt at SMR deployment would immediately crash into an existing nuclear moratorium.
And a mountain of EU-level safety and environmental assessment.
Let's drag on for years.
And New York City is a jurisdictional nightmare.
It is the ultimate example of institutional sclerosis. Siting a modular reactor or even a substantial energy hub in dense New York requires navigating a spaghetti salad of overlapping entities. Con Edison, NYISO, NYPA, multiple state and city environmental review acts. The structural complexity makes massive, necessary transitions nearly impossible without fundamental, top-down legal reform.
Yet the pressure is immense because New York faces climate vulnerability. You think of Hurricane Sandy, Ida, and its grid is already nearing capacity limits due to the high-density demand from AI expansion and electrification mandates.
These examples prove the central thesis. In these legacy hubs, innovation requires fighting through or strategically bypassing complex regulatory quicksand fields. The transition to a decentralized, accelerated future will be violently resisted by the legacy system,
requiring either that sovereign commitment or a sovereign bypass. The common denominator across all these stories, the frustrated engineer, the accelerating physicist, the sovereign cloud community, the stressed-out metropolises, is the state, in its legacy form, acting as the primary bottleneck. We have reached a point where the system of human latency, the hand-stamping bureaucrat, cannot administer a civilization approaching technological singularity.
It is a thermodynamic impossibility. If the civilizational goal is maximizing computational throughput, energy density, and physical progress, the state cannot remain an entropy source, a system that degrades energy and potential. It must transition to becoming an entropy reducer, an administrative engine that accelerates the conversion of resources into a cosmic future.
The mandate for this generation of builders and policymakers is clear: to recognize that we are witnessing the final phase of the era of great stasis. The only path forward is to accept the acceleration and become a conduit for that signal of progress.